Good evening again, everyone, and we welcome everybody back for our Lenten series. Our third speakers this evening are one, Dr. Brandy James, who is not a stranger to us at all. She is one of our members, and we are so proud of her because she went from Brandy to Dr. Brandy, and we get to celebrate that. And then with her, we also have Dr. Taneshia Greenidge. I'm excited because it's Women's History Month. They are two Black women who are very empowered, and their research is in the field of education. Both of them are clinical assistant professors at IUPUI here in Indianapolis. And so they're just going to share with us this evening about education and the youth in the pandemic. If you just joined us, I am going to drop a file in the chat box that has some information and resources that they're going to share. And if you're not able to get it in the chat box, it was emailed out to our church's email list. So without further ado, I turn it over to Dr. Brandy and Dr. Taneshia.
Thank you. Well, good evening, church family. Thanks for having us tonight. We kind of set this up more as a Q&A, but we want to start out by talking about the initial part of the pandemic and how it's impacting your children at home, either children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews. It's a very tumultuous time for everyone, and especially our youth. So in starting out, we really want to think about how we can support our children through this. Most children are either going back to school face to face, or they're still in a hybrid mode depending on their age. So we want to really look at how to validate some of those feelings of either going back to the classroom. It's kind of scary, people, especially younger children who are, wearing masks for the first time or having to wear a mask throughout the day. That's a lot for them to kind of take on in this new normal of education. So some of those feelings that you may see, they're either anxious or scared. We want to validate those. We know that the pandemic has impacted all of us in different ways. So it's impacted them as well. So we want to kind of help them think positively about some of the changes. I know some of my nieces are very, they were excited to match their new mask to their new outfits. So that's been something that they've been doing, that they've found kind of excitement in each day to see their friend's new mask. And, so that's one thing to kind of flip the script for them to make something positive out of this situation. And also acknowledging that, there you go, slide, to acknowledge this new normal and acknowledge that it can be scary. And then one other thing that I really want to really focus on, especially with our younger children, elementary age, is developing a predictable routine. Like I said, if some students are still e-learning at home, it's a lot of screen time. So we really want to start thinking about how we're reducing screen time with those students that are online, maybe giving them some breaks throughout the day. I know I like to take a break throughout the day of being online all day, and then being flexible. Taneshia, do you have anything to add to how we support our students in this?
I was going to add, when you said breaks, giving them those brain breaks, giving them time to step away from the computer and do something else, just so that they're not constantly stimulated by that screen time. Mm-hmm. And then just openly talking to them about what their experiences are, but also being okay with sharing that this is also a scary time for you as well. Kind of just normalize it a bit, like Brandy's talking about.
Right.
Next slide. Right.
Anything else?
No, but making sure you're establishing a routine, like you mentioned, that was predictable, something that they could all stick to, that you can stick to. I think at this time, kids are so used to having a daily routine of going to school. Mm-hmm. And now that that's taken away, if they're online, they need some type of routine that they can follow through with. So something that makes sense for your family in your home, but also incorporates being on school virtually, but also has those breaks in there, that makes it feel as much like they're in school as possible. If you could also find ways to give them that social aspect, because when they're on school virtually, it's not as easy for them to talk to their friends, because it's going to be 1,000 people screaming back and forth on a Zoom live. So it's not easy for them to kind of communicate. But if you can set up those times for them to have virtual meetings or virtual playtimes with friends, or just something that they can do to still feel they can connect with others, because a lot of the kids are missing that piece of being able to connect with their peers, to be able to connect with other people outside of who's in their home.
Right,
Fun
right.
to do it.
Yeah, and thinking about, developing some time for them, scheduled time of online virtual play dates, around dinner time, let them have some time to wind down before dinner with the family. So, you need that time to prep for dinner. Give them that 30 minutes of friendship time on a Zoom setting where it's kind of monitored, where you can kind of watch what they're doing. So just an idea there. All right. Next slide. There we go. So as we talked about earlier, just maintaining this open line of communication, asking those open-ended questions to your child, if you're noticing them struggling or maybe feeling anxious about certain things, or not even, thinking about some of their homework styles that may have changed, just maintaining an open line of communication with them.
Also, making sure that you're reviewing any of their student goals that they have and adjusting it in the ways you need. If your students have IEPs, 504s, finding ways to incorporate those accommodations for your students if they need it during that remote time. And that, in addition to that, like Brandy was saying, that open line of communication with educators, finding out from their teachers as well what goals that they have for their students, so you can incorporate that in your home as well. So you're still helping them meet their educational goals.
Mm-hmm. And don't feel, kind of concerned about, emailing your educators. They're experiencing this, and they know that these emails are going to come, phone calls. If you're not getting through to email, make a phone call. If you're seeing something that's really, starting to alarm you and you haven't gotten a response from your educators. So, and then you want to also think about documenting some of the concerns that you may be seeing, either electronically with records or IEP goals, and really going back to that, so you kind of have a paper trail of conversations had with educators.
I would even add to that a lot of educators are glad and happy when you're contacting them, because they want to still continue to do their job, but it's harder for them to do it virtually. So when they have parents or caregivers who are contacting them, that shows that you're really invested in wanting to help their child or your grandchild, or just the child that's in your family. So it shows them that you are willing and ready to take any ideas that they have, really to help support their job be a little bit smoother.
Yeah. And in with that is looking at asking for adaptations, especially with e-learning. We know that, they're spending a large amount of their day in front of the computer. So asking for shorter breaks or breaking down assignments is something that the educators are prepared to do. So don't feel, don't worry about ask those questions if you're noticing that it's overwhelming for the student and your home. So really ask those questions about making some modifications, shortening an assignment, having a later due date, or asking for tutoring help outside of the regular classroom day.
They would definitely rather you have the assignments turned in some form and know that you need any adjustments, rather than the assignments not being turned in at all. So just please, if you feel the need, communicate with them, whatever the needs are for the child.
And it might be helpful to even ask maybe at the end of the week, especially for some of our older students, middle school age, high school age, asking for just a check-in of seeing what the students have turned in. I know a lot of you have access to the student platform of Canvas or whatever the school uses, but you can check, what's been turned in. Taneshia, you want to talk about managing some of their anxieties?
Yes. So helping your students manage anxiety, especially if they're either at home or even going back to in person, which is scary for a lot of the kids, of that fear of getting sick. So just making sure that you're talking with your children about what is frightening them, but also, like we said earlier, normalizing that for them as well. Making sure that you're finding some time, whether that's during the dinner table or in the beginning or the end of the day, of just making sure you're having a conversation with them about their feelings so they can express that openly to you. Helping them to self-regulate their own emotions, which is the ability to process and manage our own emotions and behaviors in a healthy way. Finding ways to help them cope, whether that's giving them some self-care time, finding out what strategies work for them, whether it's in the morning while they're getting ready, having them listen to music that will calm them, or when they're going to sleep, having There's apps like Calm and things like that where you can play soft music that helps them to relax throughout that day. And even on those breaks that we talked about earlier, you can incorporate that too, to just help them bring their anxiety down a bit. And during this time, there's an intense fear that can sometimes cause some impairments for them. Anxiety can manifest itself in several different ways. There can be panic attacks, a change in their behavior. There could also be withdrawals from activities or school or family. So this kind of making note of the different things that you're seeing your children encounter, and just realizing that that could be a sign of anxiety for them. Sometimes for kids, they can manifest anxiety like saying, oh, my stomach hurts, or I'm having trouble breathing, things of that nature really align with maybe they're experiencing anxiety. Maybe their stomach doesn't hurt because they ate something, but they have like a knot in their stomach, they're feeling really anxious, and just giving them that time to do something soothing to help them feel a little bit better. And that sometimes takes trial and error. That might be like, okay, but listening to music, did that help you calm down? If not, let's find something else that might work. Whether it's at nighttime before they go to bed, giving them a bubble bath or something calming, just to get them to be able to make it through the day the next day.
Mm-hmm. And there are some great apps right now, especially Amazon Prime has some great yoga apps for children to use. You can even join in as an activity that you all can do as a family to calm your own selves down and kind of refocus your energy and still kind of build that family time together. And I'd be glad to share some of those apps. You want me to email them, I can.
And I can share some too. I have a lot on my phone that could even be like family journaling time where you guys write prompts together about what the day was like, some things that brought them anxiety for that day. And you guys can discuss what those feelings were. If you have little ones who aren't able to really identify their feelings, there's lots of games that you can play with them, like feelings bingo, that really helps them to understand what their feelings are. So that way they can communicate it when they're feeling that way.
So with change, we know that change and anxiety can manifest certain behaviors, challenging behaviors with children. So once again, it all goes back to setting this routine in a predictable way with children. So when change comes, so they expect it, that you're preparing them for those situations, such as change of going back to school or, schools reopening and closing. That's a lot for a child to, really understand and grapple with. So just start working on setting some routines. Be cognizant of some of the new behaviors that you're seeing. Maybe you didn't see pre-COVID and pre-pandemic that you're seeing now. So younger children bedwetting, they're having trouble sleeping or they're sleeping too much. Things that you wouldn't typically see in their behaviors, and you're seeing now. Those are the things that we really want to start, look to if there's issues there, and then ask questions. Open-ended questions. What's bothering you? How do you feel? Like Taneshia said, using some of those apps and games, we would be glad to share some of those tips and tools with you if you have questions on those. And when you're thinking about some of the behaviors and discipline, we really want to focus on the actual behavior and not, changing our tone towards our children, but look at the behavior and look at the root causes of what's happening and start there.
I think it takes a lot of reminding yourself that everyone is dealing with the pandemic and it's impacting you just as much as it's impacting your children. It just looks different for them because they don't have the skills that you have as adults to be able to communicate it a little bit better. So just paying attention to how they're operating. If you, like Brandy said, if you notice something that's a little different or off, just talk with them, making sure that, and making yourself as safe and calm of a place for them to come to so that they can express how the pandemic is impacting them, because this is a new shift for them as well.
Right. So the fun part, let's have an open chat here. What questions, experiences have you had as parents and guardians throughout this that we can kind of help you work through?
There are a few questions in the chat box. The first one says, as we talk about IEPs and 504s, does the school have to provide resources for my student? And if the answer to that is yes, if I feel that I'm not getting what their plan covers, what are my next steps?
Yes and yes. They should be covering and meeting those needs regardless of the student being in or out of the classroom. There is a person at all schools, a special education service coordinator or liaison, and that is the main person. If you're not getting your needs met through the actual classroom teacher of record, your next step is this special education liaison that you would contact. And if you need a little more assistance with that, I would be glad to help. I've worked with the school districts as a liaison. So if there's something more in particular that I can help you with, please let me know.
Thanks. I asked that question. I don't have any kids, but I know some people kind of dealing with it. The next question, how are teachers compensating for learning gaps such as in hybrid situations?
So are you referring more to what the students are, their content area, what they're missing, or what are you meaning there? Learning gaps.
I'll ask the person who wrote it if they want to share a little bit more. I'll go to the next question in case they want to expand upon that. And then the next question is other suggestions for what children can do to continue to develop interpersonal skills with friends and peers while being virtual.
I have seen some friends with children have used some game nights, virtual game nights that they've been having a great time with, that they can do online. It's tough for students that are, fully online, but even, I think just outdoor playtime is still beneficial. You can still keep your 3 feet or 6 feet with students at a playground, arrange something with, close friends where they can still, be safe, but be outside. The weather's getting nicer. So I think it's that time where we kind of start taking a step out and meeting, friends outside.
And there's a lot of games online that I can send them out as well. But they can just play and there's some games that you can play via Zoom. So if your family really loves board games, there's some games where you can still play that using Zoom still.
Yeah, and there's movies that you can watch together as a family with other Zoom families. They can have a movie night together.
If you have like a Netflix or Hulu, you can log in and just share your screen, and they can watch the same thing that you're watching at the same time.
And if I could clarify my earlier question about gaps that children may have in learning in this type of environment, particularly in hybrid situations where they may be learning from home, then they're back at school and back at home and back in school. How are teachers able to capture learning gaps that they can identify in those situations?
So most of the educators that I've been working, I have student teachers that are in the classroom right now doing both virtual and students in the classroom. They have been, they're using the same assessment tools that they've always used in a face-to-face situation. You would be amazed at the amount of data collection that hybrid has allowed us as educators to take. We actually probably have more student data now in this setting than we would in a face-to-face classroom, because we're able to, take more, anecdotal notes in this fashion. So I don't think students are necessarily losing any knowledge that they would have gained previously of being in the classroom. I think educators are doing a fine job of balancing collecting data and assessments for children.
I would even add to that.
How are the educators in our current situation? How are they able to measure where children are at versus where they should be at? What I'm saying?
Yeah, well, they're still using assessments. Assessments are still happening. They're just happening in 2 different settings. So some students who are back to school, they're still getting the same regular student data-driven assessments in the classroom as they would online. Teachers, I have students who are teaching online, and they're still collecting the same data. So it's not any different. They're just physically not in the classroom setting. But data is still being collected and assessed.
I would even add to that, that's even more reason for them to be doing their work and assignments, because that's another way that they can assess how well they're understanding the information. If they're turning in their work and there's things that are missing, they can say, okay, well, Brandy didn't answer this question. Maybe she doesn't have this bit of knowledge. I need to either send her caregiver with some more assignments, work, things on that particular subject to help reinforce that information.
Yeah. And be mindful of, you don't want it overloading them with tons of homework, because we know that homework is not indicative of filling in all the learning gaps they would normally have in education.
Dr. Brandy, Teresa.
Hi, my Teresa.
Are you hearing anything with regard to the students who may not be getting what they believe is the one-on-one from the teacher? When you're in a classroom setting and even in the high school, and you have difficulty with a certain subject, and most times you're able to get a one-on-one. But
I have heard from a few friends that students are having some struggles getting that one-on-one support. But once again, that goes back to, making sure as a guardian that you are aware that there's some struggles that the student is having, and you're starting to advocate that, oh, I noticed that Jonathan is, missing out this. You want to make that phone call. If you're not getting an email response back, make that phone call to that educator or the curriculum liaison or instructional assistant in that classroom.
You can even use the school counselor as another resource as well. If you feel like your child isn't getting something that they need, or you can contact that school counselor as well, and they can assist you with getting in contact with that school counselor. Or it could be a meeting between you, the teacher, and the school counselor of how can we all work together to make sure that they're getting the instruction that they need, or that they're getting that one-on-one time that they need.
Has there been any discussion surrounding what may happen during the summer to supplement education?
Not yet that I know of.
I've not heard anything at this point. I've not heard anything from the IDOE. They usually, would let us know. Probably, I would say by April, we should hear something if there is that need. But once again, that's going to go back to what the assessment data is. Students, so we're in the spring period, so students are getting those statewide tests right now. So NWEA for reading, those scores will come out soon. So we'll kind of see what the data shows us there if there is a need.
I can definitely anticipate them using the summertime to prepare for the fall, because I'm sure that they're going to be trying to go back full force in
fall.
For the fall. So they're probably going to try to readjust of how can we better support students coming back full time in the fall.
Yeah.
Hi, good evening. This is Randy. I just have a quick question. Are you seeing a difference between the public schools and the private parochial schools? Or are you seeing the kids? I mean, I think anxiety is across the board. It doesn't matter what schools you're in. But is there any difference, any gaps that you're seeing on how the different schools are handling the pandemic and hybrid versus e-learning? I was just curious.
I don't have any data in regards to public versus private schools. I mean, I know within surrounding Indianapolis, we've seen different ways of students going back and who's gone back first. I don't know what the data looks like yet on that, of differences of school districts either completely online or hybrid or doing a blended model. I don't know. I'd be curious though. That would be a good study to kind of see what the difference would be.
I think it's because there's so many districts and townships in so many different areas. I think everyone's doing completely different things. So this summer, I did some COVID research with school counselors on how they were adjusting. And from that data, there was like, IPS has their own way of doing things, and some of it worked well, some of it didn't. Franklin had their own way, and that seemed to work pretty well, like how they adjusted and the routine. So I think it just is really varying. But I can tell you, no matter if it's a public school, private school, they all are having the same struggles at the same time.
Yeah.
Dr. Brandy, I was wondering, this is Reverend Marla. I was wondering if, and if I missed it, I apologize. I did get on just a little late. But I was wondering, do you see any marked, really telling differences between with the high schoolers, the 10th, 11th, and 12th graders versus the middle schoolers or the younger kids in terms of how they are handling this pandemic?
I do not know. I'm more so, I work with the littles and the middle school age kiddos. And, from some of the, just anecdotally, parents talking with parents, I feel like the younger students have made the most of it and kind of are enjoying the virtual setting. Bless those teachers that teach a class of 25 5-year-olds. But I don't know. Taneshia, do you know if you've had any data around that or
how the older ones are handling the pandemic?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
There's a lot, especially for high schoolers along the senior half of it. There's definitely a lot of grief from the loss of that senior year. And the same thing for 8th graders as well, because those are transitional periods where they would transition from 8th grade to 9th grade, from 12th grade to college, and they're not having the same experience they've always wished or wanted. Right. And I think for the 12th graders now who are 11th graders, they thought that they were going to have the same experiences as the 12th graders from last year, who they kind of just were able to skate by because it was the beginning of the pandemic. And everything was free for all because no one knew what to do. They didn't have as much information as they have now. So I think it's been a culture shock for a lot of the 12th graders because last spring, they were just letting all of their seniors basically graduate in some areas because it was the beginning. We didn't know what to do. And now that we've had enough time to prepare and figure out all the virtual ways to do assignments, all the virtual ways to support students who are supposed to be graduating, a lot of them aren't as prepared because they thought they were going to get that same experience of they're just going to let me graduate anyways. So that's why it's really important to, one, if you have high schoolers, to monitor what they're doing, making sure they're still meeting their credits, because the schools aren't giving them that same leeway they gave last time. Right. They are okay with having kids repeat if they have to, because they have more opportunities now than the last set of seniors that graduated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I had a question about I-STEP. How are they handling I-STEP during this? And I would think that the scores would be lower relative to before the pandemic. And how are they going to handle that?
I don't know about I-STEP. I know NWEA for fifth graders, their scores, just in one school setting that I know in particular, their scores actually went up. So there's marked growth in some of their scores, I was really shocked by that, but glad to see it. So I'm not sure about I-STEP. Do you know, Taneshia, on I-STEP?
I think that from what some of my school counseling students who are in high school levels, they were bringing the students in only to do testing. I think a lot of what they are finding so far, it's either the same as before or they are a little lower because they didn't have enough time to prepare. Like we talked about earlier, of having those gaps, they're not getting the same amount of information that they would receive or the same way that they're used to receiving it, because they're 1 minute they're in school, 1 minute they might be virtual, or they're in hybrid. So there are some scores that are coming back a little lower.
Yeah, and it's good to start monitoring, your high school students of their work and what they're understanding, and especially those that are college bound right now, preparing them for that next transition.
Luckily about those who are going off to college, a lot of schools are waiving those SATs and ACT scores. So if they are preparing to go to college, really push for that. And because this is the time where they don't have to worry about taking a test to get in. Their grades are just going to be what stands for their acceptance or not. And a lot of schools are being very forgiving and accepting students to come in because they understand what's going on.
Yeah. And a few schools in our state are actually even just getting rid of the entrance exams, the ACT and SATs, just to kind of level the playing field.
Is that for the current seniors, or does it really? And that's also for 11th and 12th graders too?
I don't know about 11th and 12th. I know for seniors, because I was helping a few seniors with school applications, and a lot of them will say on there that the ACT, SAT is optional. So when you apply, you can just click the box whether you're not going to do it. And they will just only weigh your application off of what you submit, which will be you applying, transcripts, and then your essay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's good. I'm glad to hear that. Now, what about the HBCUs? Have you heard anything specifically about how they're handling entrance, of college seniors?
I think they're doing theirs the same way as well. I know a lot of schools are waiving how they're applying.
Dr. Brandy, go ahead, Randy.
Just one other question. Probably another study.
Yeah, I'm writing these all down, so I'm Be ready, Randy.
We'll give you credit.
Yes.
Well, I'm just curious, before the pandemic, we've always had different modes of education. We've had the in the classroom, your public, your private, parochial, and then you had the homeschooling and different versions of homeschooling. The homeschooling population is they still have the anxieties and so on with the pandemic, but they're already been in this mode working as e-learning. And I'm just wondering, are you seeing, because I heard you say earlier you saw test scores or something went up with one of the schools or something. I think I heard that. Or a study between those two populations would be interesting to see. Did the traditional school setting, did it change? Did we see a difference in the homeschoolers, or they're already used to doing that? I'm just curious.
That's a great study.
I was even looking at it more of like because I have a school counseling student. She graduated, but she was doing school counseling virtual. She worked for a virtual school. And when her peers would talk about what the students who are used to brick and mortar, how they're operating, she's like, our students are fine because they're so used to being in this setting. I mean, outside of the regular anxiety of just the virus,
right?
As far as education wise, they're fine because they're operating the same way that they've always operated. So I would even be interested in seeing what things they're doing well in homeschool environments or structures that can be implemented in your public schools, your private schools.
Right. Because because there's always been that message out there for homeschooling about the socialization, getting the kids. So and even the homeschooling that's using our church for their tutoring piece, they come every Monday for that socialization. So there's different models of that. But, as a parent though, like Bryce, they're in a hybrid model. So he goes to the actual school on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Okay. He does e-learning on Tuesday and Thursday. And I don't know if it's just selfishly, but it works out pretty nicely. I mean, and he seems to have, now he's in high school, so he's adjusted to it very well. We always check in with him, how are you feeling about it? Oh, I'm good. This is fine. Yeah. I feel like they get a variety in the week of going into class, and then they can be home. And then selfishly for the parents, we don't have to drive. Anyway, it's just kind of interesting how, it seemed to have worked better than I thought.
Yeah. Well, and especially for high schoolers, if you think about, especially the seniors, this is kind of giving them that taste of, if they're going on to college, that collegiate, responsibility of managing their time. And, so it could be a benefit.
But thank you both for your contributions. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I had a question about and I've heard anecdotal stories about virtual learning, and that some of the kids on virtual learning aren't doing the work, and they're playing games, or they're doing whatever, during the calls. Should we be expecting, and I know I'm thinking of the people of color also, some who didn't have the technology to do it or do it correctly. Should we be expecting a higher number of children of color to fall behind and have to repeat grades because they weren't able to keep up?
I mean, it's possible. We see, we know that there are gaps in education equity anyway, regardless of the pandemic, for students of color. So, I mean, yes, this adds to it.
A lot of them don't have access to the same resources. I know some schools and districts did a great job of providing them in the beginning of the pandemic, whether that was, I'm going to have a bus that has Wi-Fi and put it in different areas where
Right.
that fit a large population of their students are,
Yeah.
or providing those students with
Hotspot.
right hotspots or laptops if they needed. But if there's multiple kids in that one home, it makes it still harder because if there's only one computer for the family, how are they all going to log on to do their work?
Right. Yeah. I was on a call with some students, some of my student teachers a few weeks ago, and a young little boy, you know, it was his mom's like, okay, well, you can go to class this first part, and then your sister has to get on, and it's that one computer. You know, it was terrible to see, but at least the parent said, you know, you've got an hour of class interaction time before your sister has to get on. So they were trying to make it work as best as they could.
Even with that, the older kids, because of the pandemic and it putting their families at a disadvantage, they sometimes have to pick now between going to school and going to work to get money for their family.
Right.
So it definitely, I can see it putting those students of color, those family of color, at a disadvantage because they don't always have all the same resources that they had before.
And that's a perfect lead into the question that I was going to ask. We pride ourselves in being a church that provides resources to our community. And even if you're not in the Noblesville community, but if you're African American and not even African American, if you need some help, we'll help you. What resources would you say, or what are the things that you think that we as a church could be providing or should be providing in this season? Or are there gaps that you have noticed that maybe a social service agency couldn't do or the schools couldn't do that maybe a church could come in and address?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that, and I have a grant ready to send to you so we could write it.
I'll be looking for the email.
But to think about some of the things that we can do as a church, you know, I was thinking about some tutoring. We've got educators, you know, in our church congregation that could come and help in different areas. I think that would be helpful. I'm actually looking for this grant is to try to get some more technology for some of those families that are without. So either a hotspot or, you know, refurbished laptops or things like that for their households.
I would even add to that. And as far as the tutoring, that doesn't even have to be done in person. If there's still that fear of, I don't want to get sick, setting up Zoom links, finding people who have access and just letting people sign up for times to meet for a subject. So they can hop on a Zoom with someone, you can share screens and just help students learn. A lot of other churches have been doing this, and I'm not sure if this is something that you all are already doing, but just providing more food resources, clothing resources to families, because a lot of them do not have any of those resources currently.
Yeah, and Brandy and I were communicating recently about you know, hunger. Hunger with kids often like their only meal or their best meal maybe
school.
You know. So what are there any further things that we could do as a church to supplement that? So I guess that's a part around Brandy and Reverend Mindy about what we might be able to kind of look at globally.
Yeah.
Put something
Who did we
together.
partner with for the summer program when we did the meals? I was thinking about contacting them again to see if there's something else that we could do.
Or even creating a respite of some sort, some kind of activity for them to do, whether it's a weekend outside, like we were talking about earlier, for them to get that social piece.
Excellent.
Are there any other questions for Dr. Brandy or Dr. Taneshia? I don't want to keep them if there are not any additional questions. Dr. Brandy is actually out of state, which is why we moved it back 30 minutes this evening. And so we thank both of them. She worked all day and then joined us this evening for this presentation. Dr. Taneshia, no worries. We will be reaching out to you again.
Dr. Brandy.
Want to check any additional questions?
Dr. Brandy.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm surprised there are no palm trees in your background.
I know. I Our next meeting, I will make sure that I'm actually sitting outside somewhere cool. I don't ever get to see them because I'm like doing, working with family, but
Right.
we do what we do.
And I saw Sister Nadine connected to audio, so I didn't know if she had.
I know. Where's my Pastor Terrence?
He had to get off. He sent a message actually that said thank you to both Brandy and Taneshia.
Yeah, Nadine's still on the line.
Yeah.
Okay. I saw her connect to audio, so I just wanted to make sure she didn't have a question. If not, please let those who are not able to join us this evening. I did get a couple of emails asking. We did record this, so we will get it up in the next couple of days. It'll be both on our Facebook and YouTube pages. If you have any additional questions after this, or if you share the link with a friend or family once we post it and they have questions, please let them know that they can reach out. Also, I dropped it in the chat box earlier, but if you didn't get it, let us know. If you are on our church email list, it went out, but Dr. Brandy and Dr. Taneshia were gracious enough to put a resource list together, and they included some counseling resources specifically in the Noblesville area on that resource list. It also had several of the talking points that they gave us this evening, so that is available in the email. But as always, thank you guys for coming. Thank you to our guests who joined us. We will be back next week at 6:30. So we are back to 6:30 next week, and we will have Reverend Lambert, who will share about keeping the Sabbath from a pastor's perspective. And then the following week, we'll have Reverend Marla Coulter McDonald, and she will share with us about this idea of the wisdom of the Negro spirituals and how we can use the spirituals to find hope, especially in times like this and suffering. And then the following week will be Holy Week. We will have to let you know the exact time of that, but we will join with Davis Memorial AME Church in Gary, Indiana, and we will have a joint presentation with myself and Reverend Veronica as we talk about this idea of Holy Week and what all happens during this week as we make the journey to the passion and the rising of Christ.